Winter 2008. The goal he had been working towards for nearly 40 years was complete. Seraphim, or the Divine Configuration, from the Journal of NG. I feel the need to put down on paper the most frightening and powerful of all my encounters. It began like this: since completing Seraphim in early February, nothing of any great interest had happened. I did not know what I expected to happen, but to have nothing felt disappointing, to say the least. Then in August I felt a compulsion to return to England. Indeed, so strong was it that I was on the plane before I even began to wonder where this sudden need had come from. But then I don't suppose I had much choice. She controls me now, as then my divine box. She knows where to go and takes me with her. I like to imagine that I have some level of control, but I suppose that is little more than fantasy. Still, she is what I have worked towards all these years, and to complain seems childish. Upon my arrival I was left again without direction and confused as to why I was here. For a short time before, in early September, I felt drawn to somewhere, so I drove on the motorway, not really knowing where I was going, but nonetheless knowing with a great surety that wherever it was, I had to go. Sometime in the early hours, exhausted and frustrated by my lack of direction or progress, I pulled into a service station, both to rest and attempt to bolster my flagging alertness with coffee and caffeine tablets, purchased at the usual exorbitant motorway prices. It was then that I saw her and knew she was the one I had been unknowingly seeking. Sitting some 3 tables across from me in the cafe, nursing a three-quarter empty paper cup of cold tea with a lost, fearful and uncomprehending look in her unfocused red-rimmed eyes I had learned by experience to associate with Lamarck's damned creations, sat my goal. My first feeling towards her was one of great compassion, but as I moved forward, her eyes unglazed and she looked directly at me with a look I can only describe as malevolent, an inadequate word for what I felt, but it will have to do. In an instant I sensed a mixture of hatred, anger and cruel intention so strong it took my breath away, and for a moment the world span in my vision closed in like a grey curtain before my eyes as unconsciousness threatened me. Then just as suddenly the sensation ceased and the young woman before me seemed as vulnerable and afraid as she did before. She was in her early 20s, by my estimate, but the lines, etched by stress, made her appear older at first glance. Her hair was just beyond shoulder length, around so deep it was almost black, and it was so unwashed and matted it was clear to me that she had been in this state for quite some time. Her clothing was similarly disheveled, and she could easily have been mistaken for a vagrant, but I noticed that on her dirty wrist she wore what appeared to be a gold watch, with diamonds on the face, and her clothing bore labels I knew to be expensive in the extreme. Gathering my shaken senses, I dusted the food crumbs from the plastic seat opposite and sat down. Her expression changed again, this time to one of fear mixed with curiosity, but she did not speak. I smiled gently at her to try and allay her fears and said, "You don't know me, but my name is Nathan, and I've come here to help you. I understand that you are afraid, but if I am to help you, you must trust me completely. I have with me something that will reassure you of my intent." So saying, I reached into my bag and brought out Magdalene's salvation link. I saw her flinch in the manner of one who has seen such a construct before and learned to fear it before Magdalene's calming influence started to take hold. Silently I slid the box across the table, and she tentatively reached out with a mixture of awe and hope on her dirty, tear-stained face. With her previous tight expression, I saw that beneath the dirt hidden was a very beautiful woman, and as she touched the box I saw the now familiar to me flurry of expressions as its effects took hold and soothed her soul. Then with a suddenness that startled me, her expression turned to one of rage as she recoiled from my creation, as if its touch had burned her, and let out a scream that chilled me to the bone, before the anger slipped slowly away and her expression reverted back to the distant expression she had worn when I first saw her. This was completely beyond my experience. Magdalene's salvation was usually more than enough to help those in need of helping back to a place where they could begin to rebuild their shattered lives. I had never before seen a reaction like this. For the first time in many years I was afraid. As I sat staring at her like an animal caught in the headlights of their approaching demise, her eyes flickered upward so that only the whites could be seen. As they rolled back down, the beginnings of understanding began to dawn. When I had first seen her, her eyes had been a pure bright green, seeming all the brighter for the bloodshot redness of her whites. Now they appeared a dirty yellow. No pupil was visible in the putrid filth that was now her gaze. Indeed, it now seemed her eyes were no more than fetid balls of pus in her sockets, and I felt a wave of nausea at the sight. Not just at the vileness of the transformation, but because I had seen those eyes before. Her entire face relaxed as the eyes rolled down, like the face of the dead. Her flesh hung from the bone before control returned, and the mouth spread into a smile so wide her lips began to split, and a thin trickle of vividly red blood trickled down her chin. Her head tilted languidly to one side, and in a voice like warm honey, as unnatural and beautiful as her face was now unnatural and horrific, she spoke. At last, my captain." She giggled softly, moaning gently in pleasure as the flesh of her lips tore further and the blood flowed afresh. "It has been a long time, but I knew you would return to us." "To me?"